is the narrative of Abraham's relationship to his world, including his wife and his family and the people he lives with. And the difference between the two is remarkable, because the covenantal narrative is majestic and glorious, and the family narrative is not so much. He goes to Egypt and passes off his wife as his sister. Don't try this at home, right? He basically pimps his wife to the Pharaoh. Then he does it again to Abimelech. And then there's all this mishigas with the other wife, because she can't have a kid, so she gives him the maid. Again, don't try this at home. And they have a kid, and then the role of that kid, and then Isaac is born, and it's just, and the image is remarkable, because the man of covenant, who ought to have nothing but covenant on his mind, has to live in the world with all the schmutz of family life that all of us do. And how does he relate those two? Those are the two lines of narrative of the Abraham story. So far, so good? That's as far as we got last night, okay? And it's where we're up to today's Torah portion. Vayera, the Torah portion we're in, has the two most remarkable moments in the covenantal history. And those are the two moments I want to look at. Because the question is, what do these moments mean, and what do they mean together? Okay? And we only have about 4 or 5 hours to figure this out, so let's get right into it. Ready? So on page 128, right? 3 angels show up at Abraham's tent right after his circumcision, and they tell him, one angel says, Mazel Tov, you're going to be parents. And of course, Sarah laughs, because it's been a very long time. And all of a sudden, she is in a family way. That leaves us 2 angels. Angels deliver one message each, okay? The men set out from there, and they looked down towards Sodom. We did this last night, so if you were awake, you remember this. Abraham walking with them. Now the Lord had said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? And last night, I asked you the question, who's he talking to? Who's God talking to in that sentence? Answer? Himself. So we are being given something very precious, divine rumination. We're given a window into God's own wonderment. God is saying, gee, what is my relationship with this man now that he has been covenanted? Because the ostensible answer to that question is, you shouldn't have to tell him what you're going to do. You're God. Hell, what fun is it to be God if you've got to go around explaining yourself to people and paying sales tax, right? I mean, it's just no fun. But you're God, and now that you're God, but you're God who is now covenanted. That changes the terms of being God, because you are now limited, or at least bound with a responsibility to share how you see the world. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? Because Abraham's going to become a great and populous nation, and everyone's going to bless themselves by him. For I singled him out that he and his kids will do the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right. If he's going to be a vessel of justice and righteousness, he has to understand how God operates in a world. Right? So the next line is, it's a strange line. The outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin is so grave. That would seem to be a pretty good indictment. Right? I'll go down and see whether they've acted according to the outcry. Now, why is he going down if he already knows that the sin of Sodom is so great? Because now it's no longer about adjudicating the facts of the case. It's really about demonstrating how do you adjudicate facts of the case. I don't know if any of you watch American television, but we're in the midst of an interesting crisis. Where facts of the case and adjudication of said facts, and then the conclusions one draws from those adjudications are actually going to change. They're really interesting, right? Americans, this year it's a boring year in football. It's a boring year in basketball, so we've decided to make politics the national sport. Let's leave that alone. Don't ask me. The men went on from there to Sodom while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. That's an interesting sentence, isn't it? He's standing before the Lord. And then the 2 words, Vayigash Abraham. Abraham steps up. We're going to have later in the Torah, a couple of weeks from now, you're going to have the phrase, Vayigash Yehudah. Judah's going to step up. A character steps up. It's a really interesting phrase. He steps up. He steps into the moral encounter. He rises morally. That's what this indicates. And now we get the great dialogue. Ready? Will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? That's a hell of a sentence to ask God. Right? What if there are 50 innocent in the city, you wipe out the place and not forgive it? And then verse 25 was the one I spent a great deal of time on last night. Chalila lecha. starts with the words, far be it from you. Do you see that? But in the Hebrew, it's chalilu lecha. And I suggested last night that far be it from you is way too literary for chalilu lecha. Chalilu lecha really means, are you kidding me? That's what chalilu lecha. I'm so disappointed, right? Those of you who have a Yiddish-speaking grandmother, it's shanda v'necherba, and then fe. You know, it's like what does what?
What does fat mean?
Fe. It just means yuck. Yes, it's an expression of utter disgust. It's just what's the word you say when something is just utterly awful? Sorry? Everyone has a word for this, right? You know, ugh, you know, it's horrible. That's what Abraham is saying to God. This is horrible. This is so disappointing. And then the phrase, I beg of you to learn Hebrew, because the phrase in Hebrew is so much better than the translation in the English. So if you possibly can follow the Hebrew, which is above, right? Look for the little kaf hey in the margin, and then go over 1, 2, 3, 4 words, right? Chalila lecha me'asot kadavar hazeh. It's really like shame on you for even thinking about doing such a thing. Lahamit tzaddik im rasha. To kill the tzaddik, the righteous, im rasha, together with the guilty. Vahaya, so that it would be ka tzaddik ka rasha. So that innocent and guilty, good and evil, right and wrong are all mixed up. That there's no differentiation in your world. That there's no moral differentiation between good and evil, right and wrong. Chalila lecha, shame on you. Shame on you. And then the zinger is, Hashofet kol haaretz lo yasem mishpat. The judge of all the earth, the source of justice, is not going to do justice. Right? So what we have here is the most remarkable protest. Having admitted man, human being, into covenant with God, man then turns to God and says, okay, you have to obey the rules that you taught me. You have to obey the same set of rules. If there's justice, it's justice for everybody. Because if there's justice for just some people and not everybody, that ain't justice. There's got to be justice for everybody. Now what's remarkable is that elsewhere in the Bible, God does stuff without having to explain it to people. But Abraham is in the special position of being covenanted, which means he has a right to ask justice of the world. He has the opportunity to demand justice, and man and God share a common moral language. Now, the next sentence is the most important sentence in the story, because what doesn't say? It doesn't say, God said, hell with this, and smashed him like a bug. That would have been my Torah, right? I mean, I'm a rabbi. Sometimes a bar mitzvah kid mouths off to me, and I do terrible things. I crush them. I reverse their bris. There are powerful things a rabbi can do. They teach us this in the end of rabbi school, right, Rabbi?
Oh, yeah.
Right, Rabbi? Right? But you know, God listens to this challenge to God's authority, this challenge to God's authority, and think of the calculation God has to make. Is it worth compromising my authority in order to have a partner, a human partner, who understands my dream? And for the sake of the dream of a world of justice, God is prepared to compromise his authority. I suggested last night that all of us who have been parents once in a while have got to that point where we got so angry at our kids, we just said, because I said so, that's why. Right? That's authority. And the kid says, but it's wrong. That's justice. And the question is, do you give in or do you hold your ground? And God, as it were, gives in. Remarkable. And says, okay, you're right. You find me 50, I'll give you the city. And then Abraham goes to town, because once you get 50, now we can have some business, right? So 50 minus 5, you said 50, so 5 shouldn't be a problem. It's only 10%, so 50 minus 5 is 45. Do I hear 45? I get a 45. Do I see 40? I get a 40. Do I get a 30? I see a 30. Do I get a 20? Is there a 20 in the room? Will anyone give me 20? I see a 20. What? How about one more bid? Is there a 10? Would someone give me 10? Once, twice, sold to the God of the universe. Ridiculous narrative, because it's trying to play on this idea that once you admit man into covenant, The human being can now question God. And what I suggested last night is, I contrasted this with the book of Job, is that you have here a portrait of a religious world. It's a portrait of a religious type. This is the world of covenant. In the world of covenant, you demand justice. Now, you don't always get it, by the way. You demand justice. And that's why Jews are running around the universe. We're still doing it, man, demanding justice. We demand justice. Now, sometimes it's obnoxious and noisy. That's how God felt, right? But we demand justice. There's no serenity in this. If you want serenity, don't do this. If you want serenity, you're in the wrong religion, right? You go next door, there are people who will give you peace. You ever been to one of these churches where it's very peaceful? You ever been to a Buddhist place? You ever been to a Quaker meeting? Yeah. Quakers do something Jews could never do. They sit quietly for an hour. I've never seen this. I went to a Quaker meeting and I sat. And I said to my friend, when does the service start? He said, this is a service. Well, you're not going to do anything. He said, that's right. Shut up. Right? I said, but I'm Jewish. I can't shut up. Right? I said, just sit quietly. And then someone speaks and says, I want to give gratitude to Brother Joseph for bringing so much help to the community. And we all went, right? I mean, Jews wouldn't do this. Thank you to Brother Joseph. But last week, the Danish was stale. Next week, can you get it from there? I mean, that's how Jews do this. It's like people sat for an hour quietly. I've never seen this in my life. My family, we have a moment of quiet before Kiddush Friday night because we wash our hands. But it's crazy. No serenity in Judaism. But you have the dignity of knowing that you are responsible for the world and empowered to make it different. Okay? This is a picture of a religious universe. Now, we turn the page, and at the end of the story, we have an alternative universe. We have a very different story. And the question I'm going to ask you is, which one is it? Which Abraham is your ancestor? Because he's us. He's the archetype. Our lives are in his lives. Which story describes the world? Which story describes faith? Which is the normative story and which is the aberration? Right? Well, let's get to go to Genesis 22, which you'll find on page, I have no idea.
146.
146. And when they put this Chumash together, they did not put it together for people like me. Okay, 120, that's right. Yeah, 120, yeah, 146. 146, okay? Now here we have probably the most famous story in the Abraham cycle. But what I want to say, we're going to read the story. I'm going to ask you to read it in a very special way, though. This story is opaque. That's the word you use for it. Oh, meaning what? That's what you keep saying. Line after line. It is opaque in its details. It leaves out all the details of the story. Like everything you'd want to know is left out. Principally, why? Why is this happening? What does it mean? Why does he do what he does? One of the curious things about the Bible is it doesn't tell us what characters look like. It doesn't tell us a lot about their exterior. It doesn't tell us anything about their interior. The only character whose interior life is described is God, because he has no exterior. It just tells us what they do and say. It's a really opaque text. So we'll read it, and here's the game we're going to play. After each sentence, I'm going to ask you to ask as many questions as you can. Okay? And then we're going to get to, how many hours do we do have? Seriously. Till what time?
45 minutes.
Oh, we have till 10. Till 10?
Quarter to 10.
Till a quarter to 10.
Yeah.
All right, well, there goes the lesson. Oh, okay. I want you to ask as many questions as you can ask. Okay? You ready? Everybody ready? We're going to play the question game. We'll finish a sentence. I'll say go. You'll tell me how many questions you can ask. Ready? Sentence number 1. Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test.
How long afterwards?
How long afterwards?
What?
What test? Can you pass this test? Do you study for this test? What happens if you pass this test? What happens if you fail this test?
Why does Abraham need a test?
Why does he need a test? Does Abraham know he's being tested? What kind of way do you start a story? Sometime afterwards. Like, I always want to start a sermon by saying, and furthermore? And let the whole congregation go like, oh, did I fall asleep? Where did he start, right? And my third point, what kind of story? Sometime after, once upon a time is okay, but sometime after what? Okay? He said to him, Abraham, and he answered, here I am.
Ready for the test.
He seems to be ready. Where are you? It's one of the questions. More than that, does that seem like a kind of a formal way to address? You guys have been friends for a long time, right? You call your best friend on the phone and say, Mr. So-and-so? Who the yeah, what do you want? It's a strange formality, right? Ready? And he said, take your son, your favorite one, Isaac, whom you love. Go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights I'll point out to you. Okay, questions?
Couldn't find somebody better.
Yeah. Good, that's great.
Did he ask his wife's permission?
Yes. Where is Sarah in the story? Ooh. Where is Sarah in the story? Does Sarah know? Why wouldn't he have told Sarah?
He did.
You'll see me, what I did is, I had an assignment with a group of kids once, and I said, write the refrigerator note. Dear S, love A. Right? Think about that one for a
I
minute.
think another way to the mountain. What?
Okay, go ahead. What else? Look at the sentence. Any question you can ask at all.
How can you call him my favorite one? What about
Yeah.
my other son?
Yeah, I have another kid. But even this elocution, why 3 identifications? Why not just take Isaac? Why is it take your son, your favorite one, oh, the one you love?
Yeah.
Is that rubbing it in? You know, the one, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Why not just do it here? What's wrong with here? Why do I gotta go all the way to Moriah for? And where's Moriah anyway?
Yeah, how far
Right?
is it?
And how far is it? And what is it? To a place I'll point out to you. God gives directions like that. In Lech Lecha it was the same thing. You'll go to the land I will show you. Anyone ever been to Israel, ask for directions? In Israel, if you ask for directions, they say, Yashar Yashar V'Shamet Tisham Yishu. Go for a while and then ask somebody there. No, damn it, tell me where I'm going, right? Like what? Like I will show, when you get there, I'll tell you you're there. Like what kind of crazy directions does God give? And now, what's the biggest problem with that sentence? Offer Isaac as a burnt offering? Wait a minute, why is that a problem? Besides the fact that it's his kid. Yep, sorry?
Human sacrifice.
It's his kid. And what kid, by the way? Is this like any ordinary child?
The one he loves.
Yeah, it's also the one he waited to be 100 years old for. You remember that Abraham, every time God says, I will make your progeny like the stars of the sky and the sands of the sea. And Abraham keeps saying, yeah, great, I want one. Forget stars and sand. I want one. Bill, I want to play ball. Just give me one kid. God says, you will be the father of nations. I want one little league player. That's all. You have little league up here?
Yeah.
I want one kid. I'll send him to Hebrew school, I promise you. One, and he waits till he's 100 years old to have this kid. And remember, keep in mind, this is about 3,500 years before Viagra was invented. So this is not a small thing. One kid. And what's special about that kid? You know, there's promises about stars in the sky and sand on the beach and many, many nations. Through whom is that promise going to be fulfilled? Through Isaac. So now wait a minute. Wait a minute. You promised me progeny through Isaac. If I kill him, that promise is nullified. If I refuse to do that, this promise is nullified. You see the trap here? If he does it, if he doesn't do it. All right, ready? Ready? So early the next morning. Now wait a minute. Do you see something? Do you see everybody looking in the text? So the sentence ends, which I will point out to you, period, close quotation, little space, number 3. What fits into the little space next to number 3? Did he sleep that night? What was he feeling that night? Tell me Abraham's response. He's confused. He's confused. Why is he confused?
He's still in the horns of this silly dilemma that God set up for him.
Right. He's confused. Good. That's one way to construct Abraham. The beauty of a literary text is it allows us to have multiple Abrahams. Give me another Abraham. Somebody give me another Abraham. I'm so angry. Give me angry. Go ahead.
You would think, what's going on like in this relationship with this, and why would he ask that of me? Why would he?
Yeah, go farther. Be a little angrier. I left home.
Yeah.
I left my family, my home, my parents, my world. I followed you. I fought wars for you. I did everything for you, and now in my old age, I have one thing in the world that makes me happy, the kid. And now that's what you want to take away from me? God damn you. I mean, just get angry for a minute. You can feel the rage of this man. You feel him?
Yeah.
You feel the rage? Really? You would do this to me? Now you're telling me this? You couldn't have told me this at the beginning. Now you're telling me this? All right, what else? Give me another Abraham. Yes.
You gotta tell my wife.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, if God comes to Abraham and says, take your son, your only one, the one you love, Isaac, whom you love, take him to a mountain and kill him. Abraham, as you'll see in a moment, is about to go do that. Let me ask you this question. If God had come to Sarah and said, take your son, your only one, the one you love, Isaac, and take him to a mountain and kill him, would she have done it?
We're gonna find a way out of it.
What do you mean, no? No, stop it. This is critical, guys. What do you mean, no?
Well, part of it is that God is not in covenant with Sarah.
That God is in covenant with Sarah, but even if he wasn't, would Sarah do this under any circumstances? Why not?
Because she's a mother.
No.
Does that tell you something about masculine and feminine spirituality?
I'll say.
That we can imagine Abraham doing this, but we can't imagine Sarah doing this? Does that tell you something about parenting styles, about attachment to children, about spiritual life? Is there a difference between masculine and feminine spirituality? That in some weird world we can imagine Abraham doing this, but in no world could we imagine Sarah doing this. And what's this going to do to their relationship? You're going to see a little quirky thing at the end of the story. I'll tell you what, I'll give away the end of the story. Yeah, I'll give you. If you'll just take a look with me in the text, look at verse 19. I'll give you just a quirky thing at the end, because we may not get this because I talked too much. Abraham then returned to the servants and departed together for Beersheba. Where does Abraham live? In Hebron. But he doesn't go home to Hebron. He goes home to Beersheba. By the way, who lives in Beersheba? The girlfriend, Hagar. Oh my God. Oh my God. In fact, no one in this story ever sees or talks to each other again. Abraham will not see Sarah. Sarah will not see Abraham. Isaac disappears altogether. And Abraham will never again talk to God. This story explodes all the relationships. Well, you can imagine. When she found out what he was going to do, would she talk to him again? I mean, just do. So now you take all of those different Abrahams, confused, angry, disappointed. You can think of 10 others, right? And by the way, the one we learned in Hebrew school, no, he was the complete knight of faith. He went off to do it. God said it, he does it. It's interesting nobody suggested that right then.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes, please.
You know, the Phoenicians used to do this. Do you think that
Who what?
God used
Kill
to
Jews?
sacrifice children? No, they used to sacrifice
The
children.
Greeks did it as well.
Yeah, in
People
Carthage.
in
So-
cities did this because cities had to have limited populations. Nomads never sacrificed children because children were very valuable.
Oh, okay. Well, I just thought maybe God wanted to show Abraham that he should not, in the end,
Then you know what?
should not follow that.
Then there is a really cheaper way to do it. All God had to do was put up a huge billboard outside of Hebron saying, no kid sacrifices. I mean, God could have just said it to him. Wouldn't that have been a whole lot easier?
I guess.
I mean, think about this story. I mean, this story isn't, I mean, if that is, you're right. I mean, that's one of the, but if that's the takeaway from the story, you could have saved a lot of anguish, don't you think?
The Rabbi, Abraham had enough faith to say to his son, God will provide.
I'll come to that in just a second. When you say faith, what does that mean?
Belief.
And I know that, but faith in what? That God would give him another kid? If Abraham thought God wasn't going to want the sacrifice in the end, in other words, he read ahead and knew the end of the story. First of all, that's not the way life works. Wouldn't we all like to read ahead and know the end of the story? You ever do that, read the last line of a novel?
No.
Anyone read the last page of a novel to find out if Harry Potter actually does win in the end? Should I tell you the answer or not? You don't want to know? You haven't read the last one? You read the last line of a novel just to know if, oh my, it's okay.
So the rest
Right?
of it, yeah.
Right? Even, by the way, when we know the last line, remember the movie Apollo 13? We know what happened. Historically, we know what happened, but as you're watching that movie, you're on the edge of your seat because you want, really? They're going to survive? How are they going to, but Tom Hanks, he has to survive because he has to make the new Mr. Rogers movie. It's a wonderful day in the Apollo mission. All right, here we go.
Just a quick.
Just a quick.
Just a quick.
I love that. Thank
I
you.
just wonder.
That's
I
good
just
Torah
wonder
study.
if
Don't
one
be
of
quick.
the results from that last sentence is that Abraham is isolated from all of the things that he cares about most in this world.
Yep.
And so it's not like he doesn't have anything else, but these are the things that matter the most.
So,
and he still has God. So that's kind of the.
well, what kind of God does he have?
Well, but that's. That's
it's a
it.
beautiful observation. Look, it starts with Lech Lecha.
Yeah.
It starts with leave home. If this is the picture of faith, that faith isolates,
Yeah.
that faith rips you away from family, from community, from friends, and ultimately, think about what this is. Faith alienates you from your parental instincts, and it alienates you from conscience. Is this faith? Is this faith? And what does that mean? That faith alienates you from everything that's beloved to you. Is that really what God wants in the world? Really? See the problem with the story?
What if we combine the two stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, and in fact is the same Abraham?
Yeah. We'll see that in the Midrash in a minute.
It's a different take.
Yeah.
Abraham's not concerned at all. The only concern he has is whether or not God will be God. And if he isn't, he'll leave God. I honestly believe that. But
If he isn't, say that again?
if God isn't God,
Yeah.
Abraham will go somewhere else.
But after you can.
So the rabbi's reading this upside down. The rabbi's saying
There's
this,
not going to be a sacrifice, and Abraham knows that.
Anyway, whatever happens, it's not going to
I
happen.
don't
It's not
know.
gonna happen.
No, but what the rabbi's suggesting is that this is Abraham's test of God.
Yes.
The problem in Hebrew is the word is nisa. The word is nisa is a very powerful word, right? First of all, you know the word nes, which
Miracle.
means miracle, right? Or sign. Nisa is the same word. And nisa is a weird word. Any word with a nun in is weird in Hebrew, because you don't know whether it's active or passive. Abraham tests God or God tests Abraham. Who tests who? Who's testing who here? It's an arm wrestle. You ever do an arm wrestle? Everyone's testing everybody. All right, let's go. Ready? We'll come back to this, Rabbi, because it's a brilliant observation. Okay, early the next morning, Abraham saddled his ass, took with him 2 servants, his son Isaac, split the wood for the burnt offering, set out for the place God told him. What's weird about that sentence? He's got servants, so why is he saddling his own ass? Right? And splitting his own wood. And he's 100 and God knows how many years old, and he's the richest man in the world. I don't think that Bill Gates pumps his own gas. Right? I don't think Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, saddles his own ass. I really don't think so. But Abraham does. And early the morning. Why early in the morning? How early in the morning was it?
Before Sarah
You guys are catching on, right? Okay, now, on the 3rd day, that's how the next sentence, so there's another gap in the text. What happened during the 3 days? What happened during those 3 days? What were those 3 days like? You'll see this in a minute, there's a beautiful midrash that suggests the following. Isaac was born to Sarah late in her life. She never let him go. He grew up in Sarah's tent. This is the first 3 days that Abraham's had with his son in his whole life. Just imagine it. 3 days he falls in love with the kid. 3 days. Right? Now, by the way, just so we get this right, we're going to play a game. I'm going to clap my hands. You're going to answer the question. Right? Don't listen to anybody around you. I want to hear your answer. How old is Isaac?
Oh.
All right, good. So we have a 37, a 12, 34. How old is Isaac? 10. Go ahead. Okay, so if we imagine the story with a 10-year-old, we all want to kill him after 3 days, right? I have to go to the bathroom. Can I get some pizza? Are we almost there yet? Can I go? Why do we have to go to Moran? Why can't we go to Disneyland? Right? Okay. 17 years old. 17 years old. Pants pulled down to his tuchus. Earbuds go boom, 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 boom. Takes him out and goes, Mom thinks you're crazy. Mom says you're a religious fanatic. Are you a religious fanatic, Pop? Right? Okay? Right? Okay, wait, now we get 34:37. What's that mean? Abraham says to his father, listen, I know what we gotta do, let's get it done. Let's go get it done. In the Islamic tradition, there is a rich midrash about this story. Half of them are about Isaac, half about Ishmael, same story. But in the Islamic tradition, Abraham is passive and it's Isaac who does all the work. It's Isaac who carries them up the hill, Isaac who builds the altar, Isaac binds himself on the altar and says to his father, get it done. Get it done. Interesting, and that's the birth of a Muslim martyrdom tradition, right? That's where you get people flying airplanes into buildings, because martyrdom then becomes the highest expression of faith, you see? And it comes right from the story, okay? All right, ready? On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place. How did he know it was that place? He said to the servants, you stay here with the ass, the boy and I'll go up, we'll worship, we'll come back. What are the servants doing down below? Who are the servants? What happens to them? This is the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of the Bible, if you know that reference, right? Abraham took the wood and the burnt offering, put it on his son. He himself took the firestone and the knife. The two walked off together. Vayelchu shnechem yachdav. It's going to say that twice. It's going to emphasize twice that they did the walking together. Then Isaac said to his father, and again, this could be a 10-year-old, an 18-year-old, or a 35-year-old. Father, and he said, yes, same call and response. Here are the firestone and the wood. Where is the sheep for the burnt offering? If you're a 10-year-old, that's a question of innocence. Papa, this isn't the way we do things. What's going on? If you're a 17-year-old, it's asked with all the cynicism and rage of a 17-year-old. Are you as crazy as Mom says you are? Are you really going to do this, you crazy ass old man? You don't think I can take you if it comes to this? Really? Are you really going to do this? Right? And if he's a 35-year-old, it's Pop, I know what we got to do, let's go. And just the words, you put the words in the character's mouth, right? And then he says, Abraham says, God will see to the sheep. Seeing is part of this whole thing, by the way. God will see to the sheep. The place is called Moriah, a place of vision. And we know from later tradition, what's going to be Isaac's defect? Isaac's going to be blind for the rest of his life. There are things that a boy should never see in his father's face, that never leave him, right? God will see to the sheep for his burnt offering, my son. There's only one problem with the translation. Everybody love to see the translation? You see the comma after the word burnt offering? That's not there in the Hebrew. In fact, the etnachta, which is the traditional reading comma, is after the word my son. So the sentence should properly be read, God will see to the burnt offering, God will see for his burnt offering, my son, comma. You get it? And the two, again, and it says for the second time, the two walked off together. They arrived at the place of God had told them. Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood, bound his son Isaac. Not easy to do if he's bigger than you. Lay him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham picked up the knife to slay the son. Okay? Vayishlach Avraham et yado. He sent out his hand. Vayikach et amachelet. He took the knife. Lishchot et beno. He's ready to kill his kid. Then an angel of the Lord called from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, and he said, here I am. So who's calling Abraham? It's an angel. It's an angel. Everybody see the angel? And he said, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. Who's speaking? Everybody? Who's speaking? The angel. For now I know you fear God. Who's speaking? The angel. Since you've not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. Who's speaking? Now wait a minute, guys. Come on. You don't do that in a narrative. You can switch speakers, but you got to at least give me a period and a close quotation. How can you switch the speaker in the middle of the sentence? And then what? God needed this to find out if he would do it? I mean, when Abraham looked up, he saw a ram. Again, seeing is part of this, right? So Abraham went and took the ram and offered on a burnt offering in the place of his son. The Hebrew is tachat beno. Tachat beno can mean in place of his son. It could also mean underneath his son. And Abraham named the place Adonai Yireh, whence the presence saying, on the mount of the Lord there's vision. So here's the two questions, two fundamental questions. Then we'll take a look at some midrash. Ready? Number one, what the hell is going on here? All of these opened, how old is Isaac? How is Abraham feeling? What happens at the end of the story? Who's left? Who's a survivor of this trauma? Is anybody left? And then the really big question is, what does this story mean? And especially given the Sodom and Gomorrah story we had a few moments ago. How do you live with both of those? Where is the Sodom and Gomorrah Abraham? So, everybody have my little sheet? I gave you a few midrashim. If you'd like to read some of these midrashim, there is a beautiful literary rendition of these midrashim in a book by Elie Wiesel. The book by Elie Wiesel is called Messengers of God, and he takes a lot of the midrashim from Tanchuma and Bereshis Rabbah and redoes them in a much easier way to follow. And that's where I got them from, because they're just easier to read. Sometime afterwards, remember that? And so the Midrash wants to know what it was, and it was after the child was weaned. Then there's a whole take your son number. There's a whole Midrash on that, right? Look at number 3. Abraham meditated in his heart. What am I to do? Shall I tell Sarah? If I do not tell her and simply take off with him, afterwards she'll not see him, she'll strangle herself. Which, by the way, you'll see is what happens, right? What did he do? He said to Sarah, prepare food and drink, we'll rejoice today. She said, why today more than other days? He said, because, what is the rejoicing about? Abraham said, old people like ourselves to whom a son is born in old age, have we not cause to rejoice? This is Jewish. Every sentence is a question answered by a question answered by a question, right? Like, why today? You know. So she went and prepared food, and during the meal, Abraham said, when I was 3 years old, I became aware of my maker. That's the Midrash's idea. But this child, growing up, has not been told about his creator. There's a place far away where youngsters are taught, let me take him there. I'm taking him to Hebrew school, to yeshiva. And Sarah said, take him in peace. It's not exactly a lie. Here's the interesting one. Remember the 3 days journey? Remember the 3 days journey? So the Midrash imagines what happened during those 3 days journey, right? As Abraham journeyed to Moriah, an old man appeared to him. What is Abraham? An old man. So if an old man appears to him, what are we looking at? It's a projection of himself. It's a mirror. He sees. This is the internal speech of Abraham.
So why is the whole experience with God exactly the same?
It could very well be, which is a very interesting suggestion. It was Satan in disguise. Now, who is Satan? It's not the church lady. It's not Christian Satan. Satan in the Bible, Satan in the Midrash is your counterpart, your conscience, or the voice of your skepticism, right? It's your alter. Sorry.
It's a shadow.
It's your It could be the shadow, or that you're the shadow and Satan is the character, is the one who gets it right. Yeah. And he says, where are you going? And Abraham says, to prayer. With a knife, with a firestone or wood? Nobody goes to prayer like that. Well, we maybe delayed a day or two. We'll have to slaughter a lamb, put it on the fire to feed ourselves.
Exactly what the priests do later.
Yeah, exactly right. So he's given him the story, right? Thereupon Satan dropped his mask and said, now listen, this is Wiesel's construction of a Tanchuma, right? Poor old man with your poor old tales, do you think you can fool me? Don't you know I was present when the order was given? Abraham doesn't reply. Satan continues shouting, tell me, O man, have you lost your mind? Have you emptied your heart of all feeling? Will you really sacrifice your son, given you at the age of 100? So Satan here plays the role of his conscience, of his fatherly instincts, of his love. And you can see the contest. It's a contest between my love of God and my love of my kid. Of my conscience and what I hold dear in the world, and this obedience to this voice I hear that identify as God. Okay? There was a terrific New Yorker cartoon that shows Abraham at the altar with the knife, and the caption is, why must I always choose between career and family? Right? You know? Will you really sacrifice your kid? And Abraham said, yes, I shall. Now listen to the next line. This is more Wiesel than the Midrash. But tomorrow, old fool, he will demand more sacrifices, more cruel yet. Will you be able to perform them? And he says, I hope so, replied Abraham. I hope to always be able to obey him. but tomorrow, poor mortal, he may accuse you of murder. He who issued the order. He will condemn you for having obeyed. Will you do it nevertheless? Yes, I shall. I shall do it anyway. I must obey. That is true to the Midrash, by the way. So the Midrash takes this Abraham who is willing to sacrifice everything. Willing to sacrifice everything. Now, where did the Tanchuma and where did Wiesel get that? I want you to turn the page to a very, very famous and depressive philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard. He's on the second page. Soren Kierkegaard writes books like Fear and Trembling, Sickness Unto Death, a happy fellow.
Yeah.
Anyone ever studied Kierkegaard in philosophy school when you were a kid? Remember Kierkegaard? Kierkegaard lives in Copenhagen where it's gray and rainy all the time. And
As opposed to Vancouver.
as opposed to sunny Vancouver. He's a Protestant theologian. So Kierkegaard writes this book called Fear and Trembling in the 19th century. It is a midrash on the Akedah, and he starts with the following scenario. A churchgoer in Protestant Copenhagen falls asleep in church. Could happen. Wakes up in the middle of the sermon. Here is the preacher preaching about Abraham, the knight of faith, ready to sacrifice all in obedience to God, and gets it in his head that this is what is necessary. So said churchgoer takes his son after church, goes up to the tallest peak in Copenhagen with a knife and some rope, binds his kid on an altar, raises the knife to kill the child in the name of the God he worships, and the police show up and arrest him for child endangerment, attempted murder. And Kierkegaard said, what's the difference? What's the difference between Abraham and your garden variety child abuser? Interesting question, huh? And Kierkegaard says, here's the difference, right? You can live on 3 levels. Most of us live on what he calls the aesthetic level. Beautiful cinnamon buns, the aesthetic level. We live for moments of pleasure, right? And religion to us is simply a decoration, but we live for moments of joy and pleasure. A few of us rise to the next level, which is the level of morality. We live a moral life. We're willing to sacrifice the aesthetic for the moral life. You give charity. You give away of your wealth to things that are important to you because you want to reshape the world in an image of justice. That's the second level. Okay? There is a third level, which is the level of faith. And faith, he says, requires sacrificing even morality to do what God tells you to do. And that's the only way to justify Abraham. Because otherwise, Abraham is just a child abuser. And this idea, and here's the phrase he uses, and I want you to promise me that sometime during the evening or the weekend, you will drop this in conversation with your friends and really impress them. The teleological suspension of the ethical. Teleological means, listen, teleological means it's a process that's going somewhere. It's bringing me to a higher level. Suspension of the ethical means that when God says, do this, even if it's immoral, I do it. Because God said it. Because God told me to do it. And in obedience to God, I am not only permitted, I am commanded to sacrifice my own morality. And that makes Abraham unique among all creatures. It's not a tragic drama like Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter, because nothing good comes of this. Except Abraham is this, what he calls the shining knight of faith. So here's the language, ready? The story of Abraham contains a teleological suspension of the ethical. Won't your friends be impressed when you say that, right? As an individual, he became higher than the universal. The universal is morality, right? Morality says, don't kill your kid. But as an individual, he went beyond that. This is the paradox, which does not permit of mediation. There's no other way to explain this. It is just as inexplicable as how he got into it, and how he remained in it. If such is not the position of Abraham, then he's not even a tragic hero like Agamemnon, who sacrificed his daughter to save the city, but a murderer. To want to continue to call him the father of faith, to talk of this to people who do not concern themselves with anything but words, is thoughtless. A man can become a tragic hero by his own powers, but not a knight of faith. When a man enters upon this way, in a certain sense, the hard way of the tragic hero, many will be able to give him counsel, but to him who follows the narrow way of faith, no one can give him counsel, no one can understand him. Faith is a miracle, and yet no man is excluded from it, for that in which all human life is unified is passion, pain, and faith is a passion. So Kierkegaard said, if you really want to reach the top of faith, you have to give up even your morality.
Is that the basis of jihad, do you think?
No, I think not. I think it's the basis of certain kinds of faiths. Well, maybe certain kinds of
Yeah,
jihad.
I think it's short. It says, "Why I need to think? He decide for me."
Yeah.
That's it.
So,
I think this is what is going from this
so obedience.
obedience.
Obedience becomes the highest and only value.
So you
Only value.
you became robots.
It's not a robot. You actually have to make a choice to do it. He had to make a choice to do it. Early the next morning, he
No,
got up.
in the final
Yeah,
stage.
right.
I'm going on a last
Yep.
stage.
Yeah.
Instead of Maslow's theory, 7th stage.
Okay.
But
Can-
this is different.
So, but the question then is, does God command us to do things that are immoral? And if God commands you to do stuff that's immoral, must you obey that commandment?
No.
Can God ever command something immoral? Or if God commands it, does it become moral?
No.
But can killing a kid ever become moral? Do you see the problem here? Is obedience the highest religious virtue, and can God command something immoral? And then the bigger question is this a model for anybody's religious life?
No.
Is this a model for anybody's religious life? You really want people running around saying, when God tells me to kill people, I'm going to go kill them. Baruch Goldstein took a very powerful weapon into a mosque on Purim and killed 29 Muslim worshippers because God told him to do it.
Right.
Right? So this is and just to show you that this is not, I'll be right with you. I know you have something important. I just want to show you that there are Jewish thinkers who accept this. I'll show you two of them in a second, but go ahead, please.
Just a simple question.
There's no simple.
Is it obedience to God or obedience to faith?
What's the difference?
Well, faith is more wrapped up with the believer in God, whereas
This is God telling him, and he believes God told him this.
But the question is, how does he know?
Yeah. So, say that again?
How does he know?
All right, so congratulations, you have anticipated Martin Buber, which you'll find on the next page. So here is my dear friend Martin Buber. Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher, and you notice the date, 1948, right after the Shoah. Buber was rescued from, Buber moved to Israel in 1935 and sat out the Holocaust at the Hebrew University, but was touched by it because the world that created and taught him and all of his family, everybody died in the Shoah. So Buber writes his commentary on Kierkegaard. And Buber says, Kierkegaard takes for granted something that cannot be taken for granted even in the world of Abraham, much less our own. I'm on the third page. He does not take into consideration the fact the problematics of the decision of faith is preceded by the problematics of hearing itself. Whose voice is it one hears? For Kierkegaard, it is self-evident because of the Christian tradition in which he grew up that he, to be capital He, who demands the sacrifice is none other than God. But for the Bible, at least the Old Testament, it's not without further question self-evident. For it can happen that a sinful man is uncertain whether he has to sacrifice his kid for his son, sacrifice unto God for his sons. For Moloch imitates the voice of God. And then if you go down a little bit, right? The suspension of the ethical is concerned, the question, which takes precedence over the other? Are you really addressed by the absolute or one of his apes? Apes means imitators. Right? It should be noted in this connection, and it goes on why in the Bible you have this issue, right? Look at the last paragraph, right? Or second, ours is an age in which the suspension of the ethical fills the world in a caricaturized form. The apes of the absolute. It's a great name for a band, by the way. Wants to do that. Apes means imitators, but the apes of the absolute is my rock band, right? To be sure, have always in the past bustled around on earth. Ever again, men are commanded from out of the darkness to sacrifice their Isaac. False absolutes rule over the soul, which is no longer able to put them to flight through the image of truth, of the true. Everywhere over the whole surface of the world, east and west, from left and from right, they pierce unhindered through the level of the ethical and demand of you the sacrifice. In the realm of Moloch, that's the god of the Canaanites, right? Honest men lie and compassionate men torture, and they really truly believe that brother murder will prepare the way for brotherhood. There appears to be no escape from the most evil of all idolatry. You have it exactly right. How do you know it's God? Not your own shadow, not your own evil, and not something else that you're ascribing to God.
But don't we change another that it says God trust if he would like to check up Abraham.
Yeah.
Because he human.
Yeah.
And if he will be bland and delete, this means he doesn't worth God's time.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, that's one way to read the text. That's one construction of the text. That's one construction of the text. But if you look here at Soloveitchik and at Yeshai Leibovich, and they are actually working off of a Protestant theologian named Karl Barth, there is a school of thought that says obedience is what God demands. And you have no choice. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say there's a fourth level.
Yeah.
What we're doing here,
Yeah.
talking about the imagined things, really going, and then you start questioning all the levels below.
Yeah.
Psychoanalysis, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And that is very different than just being obedient.
Right. Well, see, even psychoanalysis, right? Psychoanalysis, except for one, which was Freud himself, and he's unique. You do psychoanalysis with another. It's the talking cure. It's a dialogue with the other. You need another human being to be there to reflect, to make sure.
And if you don't have another human being, you have to make one up according to your idea that we live in relationship.
Yes, there you go. There you go. You see, because if I run off to kill my kid, isn't there anybody to stop me and say, are you really sure that's what you want to do?
But the one you
Are you
make up
really
is
sure?
yourself.
I'm sorry.
The one you make up is yourself.
Yeah.
You can't think of anyone else.
Yeah.
So you're killing yourself in the process.
Yes.
So you have this whole.
I think I found your psychiatrist.
You're both psychiatrists.
Told me. There are two psychiatrists. See if you can figure out who they are.
You get doctors for the money.
Ladies and gentlemen, they're going to bill you at the end of the session. It's $2.25 an hour. So now, here's the. You see, I just want you to see the question. This story raises all these questions. And then the other question it raises is, wait a minute. A moment ago, or actually in the Torah, 3 Aliyahs ago, you gave me Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham who is willing to fight to his own death to protect a bunch of strangers. And now he's not willing to open his mouth to protect his own kid? And number one, where is that, Abraham? And if you say no, they're just two models of faith. How do they relate to each other? Turn back to now. Page 2, top of the page.
Just finish that thought.
No, don't
it's
finish
fascinating.
the thought.
It's fascinating to think that he was prepared to fight for Sodom, but it is interesting in the sense that what's missing is that dialogue between Abraham and God.
Here it is.
Okay, sorry.
Don't be sorry. The Midrash, what is Midrash? Let's stop a second. The word Midrash, the Hebrew word darash, means to go looking for something. The word Midrash is a word that we use. It refers to 3 things. Mostly it refers to the way we Jews read texts, mostly Bible texts, because the texts have so many gaps. The Bible has so many gaps. The rabbinic tradition, the rabbis of the Talmud said that when Moses got the written Torah on Mount Sinai, he also got an oral Torah. That's their way of saying you can't read the text passively. You can't read the text and just say, oh, it's written here. You always have to do this. You have to argue over it. You have to argue with it. You have to engage with it, because there's all this stuff that's left out. And that's the living process of Torah. So Midrash is the way Jews read texts. We read stuff into the text, we read stuff out of the text, we question the text, we challenge the text, we never change the text. That's what's interesting. Number 2, when somebody comes up with an interpretation of a text, an answer to one of the questions, that is called a midrash. So on page 1, you have a bunch of midrashes. Okay? A bunch of midrashes. You take a book of those, you put a whole bunch of them together, that book is called a midrash. So there's a book called Breshit Rabbah, the big Genesis. It's one line of Bible, 40 pages of interpretation. Okay? Jews have had a lot of time on their hands, and they've done a lot of writing about the Bible. Okay? Those in midrashim, those in discrete interpretations, have been collected across the generations into these books. Okay, Breshit Rabbah is a famous one, Tanchuma is a famous one. So here is one. This occurs in Breshit Rabbah, and then again in Tanchuma. And here is a different answer to the question. Okay? Here's a very different answer to the question. Do you remember that curious verse we read? Abraham lifts up the knife. And the angel comes and says, Abraham says, here I am. He says, don't touch the boy, don't do anything to the boy, for now I know that you fear God. And in the middle of the sentence, God shows up. Remember that sentence? Here's the midrash. Ready? When God sent the angel to restrain Abraham, he refused to heed the call. God himself ordered me to sacrifice my son. It's up to him to rescind the order. So the image is, Abraham's got the kid on the altar. He's got the fire, got the wood, got everything there. He raises the knife. He puts the knife at the kid's chest or kid's neck. The angel comes in and says, stop. Abraham says, I don't talk to underlings. I only talk to the boss. You want me to stop? Stop me. So the angel, according to this, hooks his arm around Abraham's arm and pulls his arm back so that he won't kill the kid. Abraham wants to kill the kid. He was told by God to kill the kid. By God, he's going to kill the kid. And the angel says, no, you're not. And they're wrestling for the knife. Angel wrestling is an old Jewish preoccupation. Now, the wonderful thing is, in case you're an art fan, you go home and look this up, Rembrandt did a woodcut and a painting of this. Rembrandt did a painting of this, and you'll see in Rembrandt's painting that Abraham is trying to push the knife downward, and the angel is trying to pull his arm up. Right? And Rembrandt's a good enough student of physiology to show you this, to show that the muscles in Abraham's arm are flexed. He's pushing. Why? You ever been to Amsterdam? Yeah. Ever been to Rembrandt's house in Amsterdam? Yeah. Rembrandt lived in the Jewish quarter. He lived mamish up the street from the shul. Yeah. Up the street from the shul. So you can imagine, this is the Torah reading for second day Rosh Hashanah. So Master Rembrandt is sitting in his front yard, and everyone's walking home from shul Rosh Hashanah, and he says, what did the rabbi say? And they said, the rabbi told us an amazing story. And Rembrandt said, wonderful, runs in, paints it. It's a really good idea to put a Rembrandt in your Jewish neighborhood, because you know that was some really good art. Right? You know, I have this idea, you know. Right. Yes, sir.
The problem with interpretation like this,
yes, sir,
is people who don't know get mixed up.
That's true.
And then they repeat it. So even in our Torah study, some people that don't know will misinterpret what's being said because it's not in the Torah.
Yeah.
And in the long run, over the centuries, a lot of it's been turned against the Jews.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do this, you better make sure you tell people it ain't in the Torah. Mm-hmm. I do it all the time. When I get people look at me and say, why is he saying this? Because it's not in the Torah.
Yeah, that's
very true. It's been used for centuries against Jews. So I'm always very cautious about this kind of thing. Sorry about, having to disagree, but
no.
I'm always cautious about this.
No, caution is always caution.
We have quite a few converts over the years, hundreds of Rabbi Bregman's and Rabbi Dan's done, and they are here, and sometimes they don't know the difference.
Okay, this is not in the text. This is read between the lines. This is that line where the angel starts talking and then God's talking. That's what this midrash is trying to figure out. How come you have a switch of speakers in the middle of the line? So you literally squeeze this between the lines of the Torah. God himself ordered me to sacrifice my kid. It's up to him to rescind the order. So God comes down, but Abraham struggles to continue. I mean, here's the image, right? Listen here, God. You listen to me or the kid gets it. Right? You listen to me or the kid gets it, and God suddenly becomes a hostage negotiator. With the knife at the throat of his son, he begins to argue. So this is the rabbi's attempt to try to reconcile the stories by giving us back the Abraham of the Sodom story these rabbis much preferred to the passive or the obedient knight of faith of the Akedah story, of the sacrifice story. If I have to choose between the two religious models, I would rather take the Sodom story and pervert this story than the other way around. You see how that works? I swear I shall not leave this altar, Lord, before I speak my mind. Speak, says God. Didn't you promise me my descendants would be as numerous as the stars of the sky? Yup, I promise you that. And whose descendants would they be? Mine alone? No, they would be Isaac's as well. And didn't you promise me they would inherit the earth? Yes, I promised you that too. And whose descendants would they be? Mine alone? No, said God, they would be Isaac's as well. Well then, my Lord, said Abraham, I could have pointed out to you before that your order contradicted your promise. I could have spoken up, but I didn't. I contained my grief and held my tongue. In return, I want you to make me the following promise, that when in the future my children and children's children throughout the generations will act against your law and against your will, you also will say nothing and forgive them. So be it, God agreed. Let them but retell this tale, and they will be forgiven. Let them but retell this tale, and they will be forgiven. Why do you read the Akedah story on second day Rosh Hashanah? Not because of the ram. Not because of the ram. Because of this. Because of this. Now, this is, the traditional idea was, because Abraham was so ready to sacrifice his kid, because of his blind faith, God will look favorably upon us. If you read the traditional liturgy of the Zichronot section of the Machzor, that's what you'll see there. Because Abraham was willing to sacrifice a kid, dear God, protect us. But the Midrash has a different idea. What tale? Let them but retell this tale. What tale? This tale. This tale. This story of a man who's willing to stand up to God and say, I needed to find out if you're a God of life. Because if you're a God of death, I'm going to kill my kid. Let it end now. I don't want my children following a God of death for the rest of time. But if you're a God of life, then you'll forgive us. This tale, this expression of chutzpah, this is the tale that gives us forgiveness at the end. Because what we're willing to do is to challenge even God in the name of conscience and justice. That's a different way of reading the story. So what we have here are two religious universes, two Abrahams, two possibilities of faith. And you'll see that if you just have time after Shabbos, you just take a look and see. I'll give you two quick ones to finish with. We read Martin Buber. This is my teacher, Harold Schulweiss, at the bottom of the third page. The real victory of Abraham passing the test, is that he knew there are times when to obey a voice is blasphemy, and when dissent is the sanctification of the name of God. Notice the angel is a lesser being than God. Nevertheless, it's the voice of the angel he obeys. He controverts the commandment. Who is the angel, according to Schulweiss? Abraham's conscience. And the fact that he's willing to listen to the voice of conscience over the voice of God at the end of the story means he passes the test. Means he finally passed the test, right? Okay? And sometimes religion demands not blind obedience, but ferocious disobedience. And that is the great, that's for him is that's the great question of this text. That's when do you listen to the voice of conscience? And what does it mean to cultivate a voice of conscience? Okay? And then just because I'm arrogant, I gave you a piece of my own writing here, right? I wrote the refrigerator note that I used to assign to my 8th graders. Right? And in my refrigerator note, at the very end here, I published this in the Jewish Journal of LA once. What I gave you here is, I had a different idea. You ready? Which I borrowed from other people, so don't think I'm that bright. The voice of the angel that Abraham hears at the end of the story is Sarah's voice. Think about it a minute. God told him to do it, and he knew it was God's voice telling him to do it. Why would he listen to any other voice? There's only one other voice in his life that he would pay attention to, that would get him to stop doing what he was about to do. And that's the voice of his wife. That's the voice of Sarah. And what did Sarah tell him? You can imagine what Sarah told him. Schmuck, put down the knife, you know. But Sarah told him that this is the wrong way to find spirituality. The wrong way to find spirituality. Don't go looking for God on tops of mountains. That's not where God lives. And by the way, what happens next, of course, in the Midrash you learn that Satan went to Sarah and said, you know where your husband's gone, you know what he's about to do, and Sarah dies. That's why Sarah dies at the beginning of today's Torah portion, which is right after the Akedah. Satan, of course, is her own self. She realized what was happening. And he cries. And for the first time in the text, the only time in the text, Abraham cries. He realizes he misses her. And he realizes his life is bereft. And after he marries off his son Isaac to Rebekah, he gets married again to a woman named Keturah and has 11 more kids. Kanai Nahara, he's 110 years old. Okay? What does that mean? And doesn't talk to God ever again. But the fact that he retreats to a life of domesticity means that he listened to the voice. And the voice was the voice of Sarah. And the voice said, this is where you find God not on mountaintops, lonely, lonely mountaintops, but in the connections that you build with people. That's my interpretation of how the story ends. This is the most important story in this part of the Bible, because the way that you choose to read this story determines the kind of Jew you are. If you read this story as does Shulwai, as does Soloveitchik and Leibovich, you're a very different kind of Jew than if you read the story as Buber and Shulweiss. Very, very different kind of Jew. This is the sort of Rochar that determines the kind of Jewish person we are. My teacher, David Hartman, at the end said, please don't make this the model. Let Sodom be the model. But let's have this as a model for those moments when life is beyond our understanding and not let go. David has an interesting take on this as well. But I believe this is the Rorschach that determines everything else. Everybody take a breath. Talking. Closing questions, comments, counter sermons? Yes, sir, Mr. Goldman.
Come back again.
Invite me back. Invite me back. I'll come. Yes.
Can I just like to make one comment.
Wait, hang on. Someone else is going to have
Mike's
he's got the
You don't think that Abraham retreated into, domesticity because he was devastated by what God made him do?
Oh, that's a beautiful way to think about it. Yeah. I mean, but what happens at the end of the story is that all the relationships that form the story explode. Is it possible that certain moments of a family's life are so powerful that we just can't see each other anymore again? I mean, is it possible? And are those the moments we want to cultivate or the moments we want to avoid? I mean, it's the end of the story is a tragic story. It's sort of like, the end of Hamlet. Everybody's dead on the stage, It's Romeo and Juliet. It's a tragic story because at the end, she dies, he dies, they're all alienated from each other. The only hint, there's one tiny hint at the end of the story, which is in the middle of the parsha. Abraham is going to die. And it says, his sons Isaac and Ishmael came back to bury him. So the only reconciliation that took place is between the two brothers. The excluded brother sent out into the desert to die, and the other brother brought up to the mountain to die, and the two of them found each other. Can you imagine that? The two of them found each other and could hold each other as they cried for their father, and they mourned him with respect and love, even though he tried to kill both of them, and yet they could find some reconciliation. So maybe there's a place of reconciliation in the text. Let me just say one last thing, and then I'll give it back to Jerry. So Jerry had asked me, I do a Torah study like this in my shul, okay? And I started it 5 years ago. I've been a synagogue rabbi for 35 years, and I decided about 10 years ago that everything I knew about running a synagogue was wrong. So my operating principle was very simple. Decide what is the best thing to do in a synagogue and do the opposite. So the best thing to do in a synagogue is to do all kinds of flashy stuff. I said, I'm having Torah study. I'm going to do it Shabbos morning at 9 o'clock. It's in a small room. You can come dressed any way you want. We're going to sit for an hour and a half and learn Torah. We're just going to learn Torah. There's nothing fancy here. And I thought, this will get 8 people, 12 people. Right? And I had the same experience you did with a wonderful group of people. I get a lot of people. And basically it was my chance to just be free and learn Torah. So my shita, my method, I love reading the text, I love reading the midrash, but for me, Torah is myth. Myth is not fairy tale, myth with a capital M. Myth is truth told in the form of a story. So the question is, where am I in this story? What does this story reflect about me? What does it tell about me? And that's what I'm always looking for in text. So I'm always looking for my place in the text, that kind of myth. That's why I appreciate the doctors here. Because psychoanalysis is a midrash. Psychoanalysis is a method of doing midrash on people's inner lives. The Torah is a way of doing midrash on people's inner lives. So when you read myth, you read it not in the past tense. This is not history. This is not a story of a galaxy far, far away a long time ago. You always read it in the present tense. Myth is read in the present tense. So the question isn't, did Abraham go to the mountain and offer the sacrifice? Or an idiot question, how big was the mountain? The question is, when am I, Abraham, sacrificing my kids? To what have I sacrificed my children? To what have I sacrificed my ideals? How many times have I heard a voice and it made me quell my conscience and do something I shouldn't have done? And how many times has that destroyed the cluster of relationships that define me? It's always personal. It's always personal. It's always personal, and it's always in the present tense. And that, to me, makes this the most exciting thing I do all week, which is to open this book and take a look. It's sometimes scary as hell. It's sometimes scary because it's talking about us now, here. And it's brutally honest. It's just crazy brutally honest. And that's what makes it. That's sort of my shita. That's my method of learning Torah. So thank you so much for the very warm welcome.
Just before we go, I just wanted to say, I mentioned this last night, aside from thanking the rabbis for doing all the things, and Rabbi Bregman for helping me get this started 25 years ago, but also to Saul and his family for supporting this weekend. And some of the people weren't here last night, including you. You left, so you didn't hear this. But
It was my bedtime.
I know. But what I wanted to make sure that people understood a little bit of the history. That Saul's been coming here for a long time, but he started coming here bringing Michael Lepovsky.
That's right.
When Michael couldn't come on his own anymore. And that was a great mitzvah that you did. I know that he was your doctor before that, so you knew Michael. And you brought him for quite a number of years here, and I know he really liked coming. And we want to thank you for doing that as well as this. And
I'm glad I came back. I'm coming back to heaven.
Anyway, good health to you too. Saul's in his 90s and he's still going strong.
Not over 90,
Driving. Thank you very much again,
So I wouldn't want you to think that because I was a Torah student, I'm going to know who doesn't come to shul. The services, you don't have to, but Rabbi Feinstein is going to speak a little bit during the service, and then there's a lunch and learn following Shabbat services. So if you can stay, please do. It'll be a wonderful Shabbos at the synagogue. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. Yeah, so Jerry, some of the copies didn't have all the pages. Can you email
Yeah, it's nice to see you too.
You have the original email that I sent you as a text?
Yes.
Can you email it to your group? Yeah, they have it.
No.